In this video I'm going to show you how to use Vortex to install and manage a graphical mod known as ENB. Welcome to a beginner's guide to Vortex part 8. The ENB series of mods enhance the graphics for a variety of games, and by enhance I mean they improve things like the lighting and the shading, and indeed add a lot of new effects to games and basically bring them up to date. If it's an old game it can make it look a lot more modern, if it's a modern game it can just make it look more impressive. But it's not just the scope of these enhancements that make this mod series worthy of special attention. You see, there are two other things you need to know about this mod. One, it usually requires a slightly different installation process to other mods for the games you're used to modding. And two, it's extremely customizable and it can take months to set up correctly if you want to create your own ENB custom settings. Luckily there are hundreds if not thousands of presets out there that other people have worked on, and you can go through the mod pages and choose the one that works for you. But of course you're also going to need to install that. Now I'm going to use Skyrim Special Edition for demonstration purposes. However, the installation process for all Bethesda Game Studios games is pretty much identical as it is for Skyrim, and indeed for most games the process is pretty similar. The first thing you're going to need are the files that are often called the binaries. These are the files that actually do the work. To download these files you go along to enbdev.com, click on the news section, then download, and scroll down until you find the game you're installing the ENB for. I'll actually leave a direct link in the description below that goes straight to this download page. Obviously I am going to need Test Skyrim SE, so I'm going to click there. There may be a number of versions listed. I'm going to click on the latest version, which at the time of this video is 0.421, and I'll get a list of changes and a download link at the bottom. That's what I'm going to click to start downloading the file to the default download location, which for me is my desktop. As for the script extender, the ENB files don't get installed to the data folder, at least not all of them. For some ENB presets there may be some files that are added to data, but most of the files you need are going to actually be installed straight into the game's installation folder itself. For this reason you can't simply drag the archive into Vortex as you do with a lot of other mods. We're going to need to make sure the files we need are in the right file structure. So the first thing I'm going to do is right click on the archive I just downloaded and use my archive program of choice. For me it's 7-zip, and extract it to a folder right here. You can now delete the archive if you want, and then open up the extracted folder. You're going to want to go into the wrapper version and you're looking for d3d11.dll and d3dcompiler_46e.dll. Those are the two files you're going to need, so select them both. Then we right click, use the archive program we've chosen to use and add to archive. Give the archive a reasonable name. I'm going to call mine ENB series v0421 and click OK. This will create the archive file for us. Then open up Vortex and drag this new archive into the drop file section. Now do not install this the normal way. If you've used Vortex to install the script extender as I showed in the last video, this will seem very familiar. Right click and unpack as is. Once it's done, do not enable the mod yet. Do not enable the mod yet. Don't panic if it does enable itself automatically, just disable it, and if you want to stop that from happening, go along to settings, go along to interface and make sure enable mods when installed in current profile is deselected. Double click on the mod to open up this panel, and we're going to change the mod type the same way we did for the script extender, only this time we're changing it to ENB. I'm also going to change the version and make sure this is 0.421, and that means I can probably remove those letters as well, neaten it up a little. Double click again. I now have the ENB series binaries version 0.421 ready to go. I can now enable, and this will auto deploy. You can actually stop the auto deploying if you want, although I've found I generally want to deploy after I've enabled a mod anyway. Now, ordinarily at this point, I would recommend you start up the game just to see if everything is still working. However, unless you want to create your own ENB preset, I would recommend you don't do that. If you're going to use a preset that someone else has made, which you probably are, I would install that preset first. I'll explain why later on in this video. So let's install a preset. I've decided to use the Truth ENB for demonstration purposes, mostly because it was the first one I found that came packaged with the correct file structure and did not need any messing around from me. So it's the simplest to show first of all. You will probably already have some idea of the ENB preset you wish to use. It may be more complicated, but let's start with this simple one to start with. You go along to the file section, and again you need to manually download this file, and I'm going to manually download mine as usual to the desktop. Once it's downloaded, I'm going to double click on the archive just to show you what's inside. As I mentioned, it comes pre-packed in the correct file structure. So all of these files can be placed directly in the game's installation folder exactly as they are, and it will work perfectly. It's got an ENB series folder that will go into the main game folder, as will these two INI files. If there was anything to go into data, it might have a data folder as well with whatever is going in there. As long as it's in the exact structure the game expects from the game's main installation folder, it's ready to go. So this one is in fact ready to go. So I can drag it straight onto the drop files section. And once I find it, once again, right click, unpack as is. Do not enable it just yet. Double click on it. Select the mod type and change it to ENB, and if you want you can change the version of the mod name, although at the moment it seems to be set correctly. You can, if you want, also go along to source, change it to Nexus if you downloaded it from Nexus, and hit guess, and it will probably figure out which mod the preset is from, allowing you to just click on the link there and go to the page directly. Double click to close this and then enable the mod. It should self-deploy if you have that set. If not, you will need to deploy mods. And the ENB is installed and almost ready to go. I say almost. You probably should go back to the page where you downloaded the preset and reread the description and focus on the installation instructions. Obviously, the first few steps may be different because we've installed it via Vortex, but there may be some instructions afterwards you need to check out. For example, this is telling me that I need to open up the launcher from the Skyrim Special Edition folder and make sure 64-bit render targets is checked. So I go along to the installation folder, run Skyrim SE launcher.exe. This will open this. You may not have seen this for a while if you've been running it from the script extender. Click Options and then Advanced. 64-bit render targets. And there may be some other things you need to change. Check here and follow the instructions. A lot of these settings changes are common to ENB presets, and you may find once you've set up for one ENB preset, you're probably set for all of them. Indeed, you may even find some of the settings recommended may not be for you. You may decide to ignore them or tweak them a little. That's a little out of scope for this video though. I've now got mine installed and set up as instructed, and I'm ready to start the game. And once in game, you should see the effect of your ENB immediately. If you're using a very subtle ENB and you can't quite tell, you can press Shift and F12 and it will turn the ENB off. Do the same to turn it back on. It might be a little easier to see here in the rain because you can actually see the clothes look wet. If I turn the ENB off, Shift F12, it just goes back to normal. Everything looks, well, exactly the same as it does when not wet. Turn the ENB back on. There you go. You can also press Shift and Enter, and that will open up the ENB control panel. Shift and Enter to get rid of it. That's for tweaking the settings. Again, that's a little out of scope for this video, or at least this particular section. And that's it. I now have ENB installed and a preset. And I can disable this preset, download another one, try that out, and switch between the two presets to see which I prefer, or have one preset for one profile and another for a different profile. I can also have multiple versions of the ENB binaries if I want. It's pretty much now treated the same way as the other mods, as long as you remember to change the mod type and the file structure is set up correctly. Those are the two critically important things. Unfortunately, not all ENB presets come pre-packaged with the correct file structure, and so you are going to need to reorganize the files into that correct structure to get them working with Vortex. And to demonstrate what I mean, I'm going to download the Skyrim SE Re-engaged ENB preset, which is, at the time of making this video, the most endorsed ENB preset. I've downloaded the 7Z archive for this ENB preset to my desktop, and I'm going to right click and extract the entire thing to a folder of the same name. And once it's extracted, I can actually delete the archive itself. And I'm going to open up the folder to show you what's inside. There's another subfolder, and then you've got, as you can see, a number of options. If I go to the main file, you can see there's a color correction version for performance, a quality version that is pretty good, and the ultimate edition version that basically has all of the bells and whistles. This is the one that will hit your machine the hardest, but will look the best. And there are optional files in some of the subfolders as well. So as you can see, it's a little more complicated, and more importantly, the file structure is not set the way the game is expecting it, and so you cannot manage this with Vortex in its current state. So I'm going to reorganize this. The first thing I'm going to do is create a folder that I will use as my working folder, a place to create the correct file structure, and I'm going to give it a name that is useful. I'm going to call the folder Re-engaged ENB v8.6. So I just go along to my desktop and I hit create new folder. Then I rename that to Re-engaged ENB v8.6, and then I can open that up. This will be completely empty, and if I reopen the archive that I extracted and go to the top level where it says install and readme text, we're pretty much ready to begin. Now at this point, you need to open up the mod's description page and find the installation steps and make sure you know what it's going to tell you to do. Of course, the first few steps are to download and install the binaries. You can ignore that because you've got Vortex handling that for you right now. And you should also remember that at any point where it tells you to copy files into the Skyrim game folder, you do not do that. You put it into the new folder that you have created. The first thing it's telling me to do is select a version and open that folder, and then copy all of the contents from that folder into the Skyrim game folder. I'm going to go to the main file, install. I'm going to pick the Ultimate Edition version, the one with the best image, and then I'm going to select all of these files and I'm going to copy them. I'm not going to cut them. I'm going to leave them there just in case I make a mistake and want to start again. So I'm going to copy these here. These are the main files. Next, it tells me that if I want one of the optional depth of field settings, I need to open the folder. So I'm going to go back and go up and up again. Optional depth of field strengths. I think I'm going to go for a soft depth of field. And it says copy the contents of that folder and paste into your Skyrim folder and allow to overwrite. So it's got a folder called ENB series. I'm going to copy that and paste it here and allow it to overwrite any files it finds. I'm going to replace them. And so on. Depending on the ENB preset you've chosen, there will be different instructions, different files you're going to need to copy across. Just remember, whenever the instructions tell you to copy files into the game folder, copy it into this working folder instead. Once you've got all of the files that you're going to need for the settings you want set up here the way they would be set up in the game folder, you can close this and you're pretty much done with the file management section. Now you need to create an archive. So I'm going to select all of these. I'm going to right click, use 7-zip to add to archive. I'm going to give it the same name at the moment, but then I am going to rename it a little bit. I'm going to rename this to Ultimate Soft DOF because I selected the Ultimate preset with the soft depth of field, so I'll keep that like that. I then open up Vortex and drag the archive we just created onto the drop files panel. And at this point the process is identical as it was for the previous ENB preset. Right click, unpack as is, do not deploy yet, double click, set the mod type to ENB and perhaps change the name if you want. That is completely up to you. Because I renamed the archive, I can see it is the Ultimate Soft DOF version. And then once that's done, enable, and I'm ready to go. And this time the difference in game is a lot easier to see. I can, of course, just show you, turn it off, turn it on. You can see that fairly clearly. The ENB is installed. Now, that was actually quite a performance hit, so perhaps I want something that's a little less taxing than the Ultimate version, so I could create a whole new folder, give it a new name, and start the process again, but with different settings, and I can load them back into Vortex and try them side by side, switching one on and one off. So I just disable the re-engaged Ultimate Soft and enable the new version with slightly performance friendlier settings. And honestly, once you've gone through this process and set up the files the way you need them setting up one time, setting it up again is actually going to be very, very easy. You'll probably find yourself doing it in half the time the second time and a quarter of the time after that, to the point where you'll be able to do this in your sleep. Then you may end up with 10 or 15 different presets ready to go so you can switch between them very quickly and decide which is the best for you. I will quickly mention the fact that you can actually drag the archive you downloaded from the mod page into Vortex the same way as you did with the simple ENB preset and then install the mod more or less the same way. Just unpack as is. Do not deploy. Make sure you set it as ENB and then right click and open in File Manager, and then do the file management within here. I happen to feel it's a little more complicated because what you need to do is go down to the folder you want. Let's say you want the quality version. Select all of those files, copy them, and then work your way up to the top folder and make sure it is the top folder, not the Skyrim folder itself, and then paste them there, and then keep going up and down until you get all the files set the way you want to. You can do that, it does work. I just prefer doing all the file management before I add it to Vortex. I did mention that some ENB presets come with files for the data folder, and although the process is more or less the same and it is pretty easy, I will quickly demonstrate it for you using another very popular preset called Rudy's ENB. Once again, I download the archive to my desktop, right click and use 7-zip to extract all the files to a folder of the same name. I create a working folder called Rudy ENB v5.0d, and then I open both of these folders up so I can start transferring files between them. Go down one level. Now, the version I've downloaded is for Obsidian Weathers, which is what I'm using. I go in there, I go into the folder called Skyrim SE folder, and then I'm going to want all of these files. I'm going to copy them across to my working folder, and then I'm going to go back up, back down again to add-ons. There is a fix for Night Eye. There are several other things. If you want to change the depth of field, you do that the way we did for the last preset. But I'm interested in the Night Eye ENB fix. And there is a fix for the normal game and a fix for the Predator Vision mod. I'm using Predator Vision mod, so I go in there. And there are some files for both data and ENB series. If I look in there, there's an ESP. And in there's a couple of files to change. I'm going to select all of those files. I'm going to copy them and paste them, and when it asks to overwrite, yes, I want you to overwrite and replace. And it's that simple. The file structure is anything that goes in the main installation folder are the loose files. Anything in this ENB series folder will appear in the game folder under a folder called ENB series, and likewise the same is true for data. That is it. It's a simple matter of then selecting them all, using 7-zip to add them to an archive, dragging the archive into Vortex, unpack as is, dismiss that, double click, make sure the mod type is ENB, then I can enable it. And when it's done, because you've actually flagged this mod as an ENB mod, make sure you go along to plugins, find any plugins that this mod has added, Night Eye ENB fix for Predator Vision, and enable it. Make sure those files are enabled. And that's it. The mod is now installed with files for the data folder. Let's go in game and just make sure it's all working. And once in game, it's pretty obvious the ENB has been installed. You can see the difference even without me switching it off and then on again. One last tip for those of you who intend to try out lots of different ENB presets but are a little worried you might lose track of them. If you go along to the preset you've installed in Vortex and double click on it, go along to the right hand panel and check out category. Drop down the menu and scroll close to the bottom. You will find Presets ENB. Select that and it will now appear in this category. If you then go to the top and select the drop down menu and again select Presets ENB, it will just list the ENB presets you currently have. That's going to make it a little easier to find if you've got, a fair number. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is all we have time for in this video. I do, however, have a few other things I would like to discuss with you, but they are not really essential if all you want to do is quickly install and manage an ENB and a preset using Vortex. So I'm going to include this information in a follow-up video, an encore video that will be released immediately alongside this one, and I'll have an end card appear on this video. And if you're interested in some of the more nerdy technical stuff like what an ENB cache is, how you can manage it with Vortex, and what happens if you run an ENB without a preset, you can find that out in the next video. And of course, if you're not interested in that, I will be back with part 9 of this series, and I would love it if you could join me for that video as well. But whichever video you decide to join me for, I look forward to seeing you there. And until then, remember as always, have fun.